All right, so thank you all for joining us once again. We have the next track in track two of the next session in track two of the Games User Research Virtual Summer Camp. And we have Steve Bromley that's here to talk about getting in front of game design decisions, mind maps for note-taking, analysis, and debriefing. For those of you who missed it earlier, we're going to be taking questions at the end, so please feel free to post them in the Q&A section so that they'll be collected so that we can get to them later. And whenever you're ready, you can take it away.
Fantastic. Thanks, Becky. Yes, hi, my name is Steve Bromley. I am a user researcher. For about 5 years, I was in the PlayStation's team in Europe, working on their games and their hardware. I no longer work in games directly, but I still administer the Games User Research mentoring program, so some of you might have encountered me through that. Today, I wanted to talk about using mind maps, them as a tool for both note-taking, analysing and debriefing studies, and some of the ways that that can help speed up the research process and make sure that we're getting results to our game teams when they need the results by. So what I'll cover today is why it's important for us to be prompt in our work for games developers, and then looking specifically at how you can use mind maps to capture research data, how it can help with the analysis process, and how it can help debrief research findings each in turn. Each of those have some live demos, so wish me luck. So first of all, why is it important for us to be prompt with research when we're working with game teams? As I'm sure most people are aware, game development is under huge time pressure. The type of marketing budget and marketing spend that most games have mean there's a very strict deadline for when games have to be ready. And our work as researchers, where we're identifying usability issues or experiential issues and trying to improve the game, has to balance with other concerns that producers have, such as fixing bugs, adding new features, and essentially making sure the game is in a suitable state by the time that it's released. However, running good quality research takes time. There's a recruitment lag that can be between a couple of days or a couple of weeks for us to find the right participants, which is very valuable when we're running studies. Analysis takes some time. The time that we go from that raw data that we have, interpreting it and working out what are the important and relevant bits of information that we want to share with our game teams, and then preparing it for reporting, like making a presentation or making a report. All of these add time, and we want to optimize that as much as possible. We make this harder for ourselves because we like people to watch research sessions. We often invite game teams to come and view the sessions live, so that they can see the issues firsthand. We do that for very good reasons. We believe that game teams, if they see the issue, they'll be able to understand it at greater depth than if we just told them about the issue later. By presenting it, we're going to lose some of the granularity and some of the fidelity that a designer or a level designer or an artist would be able to spot by seeing the issues themselves. Also, it helps create buy-in, and people believe our findings because they've seen these are real participants playing the game for real, and these are real issues that they're encountering. So we encourage people to view research sessions. However, this then creates the temptation that they're going to go away immediately after viewing a single session or a couple of sessions and start making changes immediately without the context of seeing what the other participant did or going through that analysis process. That skipping of the analysis phase isn't great. It devalues it says that analysis is worthless, that there's no point in us doing it because they can see the issues straight away. And as researchers, we believe there is value in analysing the raw data to come up with some conclusions, and that they're making poorer quality decisions because they don't have the fully analysed findings before they start making changes. So we as researchers, we want to reduce that gap between when the study is complete and when the results are ready to be shared with the game team. For a typical study being one-to-one sessions with 5 or 6 participants and about an hour and a half of gameplay. When we were working at PlayStation, we could get that down to about 24 hours, so that a day after the test had finished, we had something ready to present to the game team. And by bringing it down to 24 hours, that reduces the potential for the game team to go off wildly in another direction without our analysed input. The tool that I want to talk about that can help with this is a mind map. So starting off with what is a mind map, just to cover the basics, perhaps everyone's familiar with it, but it's this idea of having nodes coming off a central point, and then you can add more nodes, and you don't have to define in advance what all the nodes are. And as you can add notes to each node, let's say subnode, as you're going along. That is what a mind map is. So the first step is preparing that mind map, creating a notes-taking template that we can use for that process of capturing notes live into a mind map. Typically in a user research study, you'll work with the game team and come up with some relevant objectives based on what their current priorities are or what they need to know. I've made up some for a made-up game here. So the game team might have come to you to say, do players know where they have to go on level 2? Do they understand how to use the fast travel mechanic? Can they complete the puzzle in the amount of time that we hope they can as designers? And does the tutorial correctly teach people how to use their jetpack? As a researcher, you'll then have gone and screened the code, by which I mean played through it and understood all these mechanics and the state of the build, and if it's going, what's in the game and what's not ready in the game yet. And you'll know what is in the build that will be presented to players when they come and take part in your study. You then, as a researcher, should start to think about what are the categories that I want to capture issues in. So some sensible categories to capture observations in could be what level did the issue occur on, and so you might prepare categories for each level. If you're looking at some of the mechanics like the jetpack or the fast travel, you might want to create categories that cover each of these abilities. So one for the jetpack, one for the fast travel mechanic, or you might also want to do it by location. So if it's an open world game and there are lots of different bits of the game, you might want to pre-prepare categories saying, okay, here's where I put issues that happen near the cave. Here's where I put issues that happen near the lake. Here's where I put the issues near the big tree. You as a researcher, having understood the game and being able to anticipate what it is that a player will experience, can come up with some potential categories that you're going to capture the notes in. And often it can be a combination of different things. So not just doing it level by level, but doing it level by level and also by mechanic or ability. Okay, so for taking notes, I'm now going to hopefully stop sharing the presentation and start sharing a demo mind map. And you should see that there is a demo mind map, space for note taking, and areas for each participant. And in this kind of test, we'll be doing it participant by participant. And so if they said some things in the pre-interview about their current playing behavior, you might note, I play Halo, and however, I haven't played an open world game in the last 3 weeks. Anything that you as a researcher feel is relevant to their behavior that they're going to have in the study. You'll then move on to looking out for issues during the tutorial, and as they encounter issues, note-taking them. So for example, they might have missed where to go after the NPC. They might have failed the jetpack tutorial. Why? Because they didn't see the hint about it, and then so on. So for example, when you get to level 1 and they have some issues with the puzzle, you might start note-taking here saying, I don't know, failed to notice the puzzle, and so on. And then for the second session, you'll have the second participant, and then you note their issues that they encounter. So they also, in this case, got through the jetpack tutorial by brute force, not by understanding the mechanic. And they found the puzzle, but didn't know how to interact with it. Right, and as you will know, because you've done user tests before, we'll end up with a huge mind map full of lots of notes because we observe lots of things during the session. And it's very hard during a session to identify what's meaningful data and what isn't an issue. So it's usually better to over capture things at this point rather than trying to analyze each finding as you're writing it. So I'm going to swap back to the presentation. Won't be a second. So some tips for note-taking on the mind map. As I was doing it then, I largely relied on shortcuts for creating the new nodes and creating sub-nodes based on the node you're on. If you learn them, you never need to touch the mouse, and that can greatly speed up that note-taking process so you can keep up with what people are saying in interviews or what you're observing without having to spend a lot of time trying to find the right section to put it in. It isn't a tip written down here, but you can create new categories on the fly as you're going through. So if you realize you've missed a category and you think that's important, you can create that. The findings can be tagged. So I didn't do that in the demo just then, but you can tag each of those findings with which participant had the issue. So add a flag for participant 1 and add a separate flag for participant 2. This can be really valuable as we go through the analysis stage that's coming up, because it can help you trace back the note as you start to manipulate it and add some more insights back to which participant had this issue in case you need to trace it back at any point. Also, some tools support either shortcuts for timestamps or automated timestamping, so that you can create a note of when that issue occurred and then link it with a video if you ever need to go back and look at it again or take screenshots. Having taken some notes, you want to move on to, well, after you've taken the notes for all the participants, you want to move on to analysis. So I'll do another live demo in a second, but the process we're going to look at is first duplicating all of our notes, because we're going to start fiddling with them and we don't want to accidentally delete them or move them or lose some of the data in there. So we want to keep a backup of it. And then we're going to start reading from the top and analyze each issue that we come across or each observation we come across and decide, is this useful? Is it meaningful? And if so, where should it go? We'll create new categories for each of the issues to decide what, to aggregate the issues based on a theme or on a topic, and then copy down the raw notes. I'll now swap back to the mind map and we'll have a look at doing that. So miraculously, lots more notes appeared while I was off the mind map, where we have some usability issues, we've got some points about people's opinions, and they have been tagged with a color for each participant and have a timestamp in as well. And I've done it for the first 2 participants and we've left the rest out. So if this was real, I would copy this whole node at the top level and make a separate copy of it before I started, because I'm going to start fiddling with it and I don't want to lose it. But then start at the top, the first note you have, and the first one is the player required assistance to overcome the tutorial. They failed to see where to go after completing the first part and backtracked. So I'm going to take that note by cutting it. I've got an analyze section, so there's going to be some issues about the tutorials, I've decided, because that was about the tutorial. And players didn't see where to go, and then I can paste the raw note there. I think you can then carry on. And so the next issue is about, they didn't see the prompt saying about the jump pack and they had to get through it with brute force. So that could be an issue with the tutorial. It could be an issue with the jetpack. Because I've moderated the session, actually I know in advance there's lots of issues about the jetpack coming up. So I'm going to make a category for jetpack and say players didn't see the prompt that says when you should use jetpack. Terrible spelling, and stick in the notes there and then carry on. And so, okay, there's another one about the jetpack saying they didn't know when they should use it versus double jump. Again, the participant and the next one didn't see the jetpack, and then they complain they don't like the jump because they didn't know how to do it. So all of those are about that same issue, about they didn't see the prompt and so they didn't know when they should use the jetpack. So that's all evidence for there. And so on, working through all the notes. And then when you get to participant 2, again, you'll see they have some issues, such as the one about the tutorial, not knowing where to go. So that's more evidence for this first one. They didn't do the optional jetpack area. They didn't spot the visual indicator. Again, something wrong with the jetpack there. So I'll stick that as this jetpack issue. And later on, they have a different issue on level 1, where they try to double jump in the jetpack area, but this time it's because they've forgotten the controls and they need prompting. So that isn't that they didn't see the cue that they should use the jetpack, but there's a separate jetpack issue there. So under that jetpack section, we know there's another issue, such as unable to recall controls. Worded particularly poorly, that blames the player, but later on we'll reword it so it describes correctly what it is about the game that's wrong there, and we'll stick that in. And so on, working through all of the notes that we have. As I mentioned, in a real test, we'll have a lot of notes here, so that could be, it could take an hour to go through all the notes and aggregate them in the proper sections. After this, we'll want to reword them, but I'm going to pop back to the presentation, share the screen. So yeah, as we saw in analysis, we duplicated the notes, we started reading from the top, the categories have merged as we went along, we copied the raw notes down so that we had the record of what's the raw data that we're now just making an issue about or a finding about. And then next we'll reword them. So each of those issues, as I've copied them down so far, I haven't explained them in enough depth for a game team to take action. They need a cause. What is it about the game that made this issue occur? And they need an impact. What impact did they have on the player's experience, so that the game team can judge the severity of the issue? If it meant that it took them 30 seconds and then they overcame it and they forgot all about it, that's a less of a priority issue than they got stuck for half an hour and then they threw down the controller in a rage and we never saw them again. So making sure we're including the impact on the player as well is very helpful when we're explaining these issues. On to debriefing. So stopping sharing for a second. As I mentioned, one of the challenges we have as user researchers is that need to get results to game teams as soon as possible and make sure that we're reducing that gap between when we have the findings and when we're presenting it to the team, so that they're taking informed decisions. Now, it can usually take a long time to create a PowerPoint or a report and add the screenshots to make sure that we're covering the issues. And that is important to do. I'll talk about that more in a second. However, the mind map itself can also be used for debriefing. So we can return to those same issues that we have, or at least an advancement of those issues. And in this version, we have issues about the tutorial. I've minimized them because I haven't written them in this case. We have some issues about the jetpack, so that category there. We have some issues about the puzzle, so some issues that players encountered with the puzzle. For each of these, we have what the issue is and the causes explained. So why did people have problems with the puzzle? The appearance is similar to the scenery, it didn't stand out, and there was no feedback given. And the impact, so what did that cause the players to do? They failed to spot the puzzles, some interacted with the puzzles, but then believed that they weren't working, and they caused them to backtrack, losing up to 20 minutes. So we have a fully explained issue there in a state that's suitable to present to the game team. Inside each of these issues, we still have the data. So if we did need to trace it back, we can see, okay, this happened to whichever the blue participant is, in this case, participant 2. It happened in 8 minutes in. And so if I needed to go back and get the video, I could go and do that. Or if we needed to check it to make sure we've explained it fully. It also has an area where we can write solutions. So a popular way of debriefing is to first present what the issues are to the game team, and then as a researcher, facilitating the discussion with the rest of the game team, helping them think about and evaluate potential ways of addressing that issue. Should they, I don't know, change the color of the puzzle? Should they make the puzzle flash when people get near it? Should they make an NPC talk about the puzzle and then people will realize the puzzle's there? Those are the type of ideas that as a researcher we want to encourage other people to have. Everyone will have their own discipline perspective on the issue. So for example, game artists will have insight on the aesthetic and what's the correct visual way to interpret these issues. Producers will have an input on what's feasible in the amount of time we have and what can we achieve. Programmers will be able to talk about what's feasible in code and what is an easy fix versus a hard fix. And we as researchers want to encourage teams to have those discussions. And as part of our debrief, we can also note take it. So after presenting the issue about the cave puzzle, we can write down what the team suggests are answers, such as NPC can reference it or make puzzle flash, and so on, so that we have a record of that and we can share that with our teams after. I'm going to swap back to the presentation for the final time. So although presenting in the mind map is useful to make sure we've got the result to the teams as soon as possible, it isn't suitable as a long-term storage of the issues or what happened in that test. It doesn't capture the context of what was the state of the build, when did the study run, who were the participants, all that kind of information that will be helpful 6 months down the line to make sense of this report you found. It also doesn't have screenshots or videos or all those things that help explain the issues to someone who is perhaps slightly removed from the actual game development, like someone working at an executive level. So it's still important to make a report or a PowerPoint to document the findings, but by debriefing to the game team immediately based on your mind map, that gives you more time to focus on that. Also, many mind map tools allow you to export into a format that's suitable for PowerPoint, either directly into slides, or it can export rich data formats such as CSVs that have all the text from your mind map in a structured format so that a script can import it into your report, and you don't have to rewrite all the issues once you've got them written perfectly in your mind map. As we talked about, you can debrief straight from the mind map, and that documenting stage can come later. And we also talked about the mind map is a suitable level of fidelity that you can use it to have a discussion with your team about here are some potential solutions to the issues as well, and encourage them to come up with better answers than I, as a researcher, could come up without input from art and design and other people who are experts in their disciplines. So largely I'm agnostic about mind mapping tools. I've talked about the process. My preferred one is MindJet by Mind Manager. There's a couple of reasons why I do like it, although I'm not saying that these other tools don't do it, it's just reasons I do like it. It allows you to tag one observation with multiple participant IDs. So if the same issue had happened for participant 1 and participant 2, you don't need to necessarily write it again for participant 2. You can just tag participant 1's observation with a tag for participant 2, and then that saves more time when you're note taking. Also, it can export to a format that's suitable for PowerPoints. The one we looked at today in those demos was MindNode. I know XMind is very popular. I think it's free, but I'm sure it says on their website. Also, an interesting one would be Miro. People might be familiar with Miro. It's that online collaborative tool where you can put up post-it notes and all collaborate on it at the same time. It used to be called Real-Time Board. And it does allow, as I mentioned, everyone to work on the same map at the same time, which is good. And it says it supports MindMaps. I think because it's not a dedicated mind map tool, it's perhaps not as efficient or doesn't work as well as some of the other ones. But the fact that you can work on it multiple people at the same time is interesting and might be useful for some teams. Right, that's everything I had. I should credit Mirwais, who was previously on Sony's European team. I know he's now based in San Francisco. About 10 years ago, he forced all of the team to use mind maps and move away from how they were traditionally taking notes. And it's been very efficient and very beneficial for the whole team. So I have to credit him for putting all the hard work into it. I'm happy to take questions both now or if they occur to you later by email or Twitter. I also should mention, I had a book out earlier this year called Building User Research Teams, and it talks more about using mind maps and also other ways that we can speed up the research process to make sure we're getting results to our teams in time. So if you're interested in hearing more about it, as well as talking to me about it, you could read the book too. That's everything from me. I'm now going to stop sharing and see if there are any questions.
There are a few questions. You had a lot of people asking about what specific program or app you use using for the mind map.
So that was MindNode, which I think is a paid one. I don't think it's that expensive. I'm going to guess 20 quid, but I'm not sure. It's not my favorite one. I prefer MindJet, as I mentioned, but XMind is a free one if you want to give it a go and see if it works for you.
Great. And then another question was, are there any simpler templates that you can use to get started?
That's a good question. So as you might have seen at the beginning, often the template's very bespoke to your round of research where you want to have screened the code and then identified, here are the categories that I want to have. I guess a lot of studies are very similar. They will often start with, well, again, depending if you're doing one-to-one usability testing, but they often start with an interview, then you have some tasks based on the levels or the bits that people are going through. And then you have a questionnaire or a survey at the end, and then a post-session interview. So that could be templated. I don't think it exists currently. However, it's going to sound like a promo for the book now. As part of building user research teams, the website for the book, I'm still working on it, but it has a lot of user research templates on it. So if you're interested, the website buildinguserresearchteams.com has a section called templates, and there you can sign up to hear when templates like this are ready.
Great. And I'll put that link in chat. It's building user teams at
buildinguserresearchteams.com.
And then you have another question from Hannah, who asked, how has reception been from dev teams when using MindMaps to read out data compared to traditional methods? And do you notice a difference in their engagement?
That's a great question. So the completely honest answer, which wasn't exactly what I presented today, is when we're doing it, because MindMaps can often export to a PowerPoint format, how we usually ran them is we would export it to the PowerPoint, present it off that very simple PowerPoint that doesn't yet have the screenshots or the things you'd want to add if you had more than a day to analyze. And then for the workshop section, move to the mind map. I think we did that because it was easy, because it did support that export directly into our PowerPoint. If it had been more manual, I would have been happy to do it straight from the mind map. So I don't have an informed answer, but I think that's a really interesting point that it might impact dev teams' opinion. However, if the problem we're trying to solve is dev teams have seen the study live, and so they know what's happened, and the service you're providing is just, here's the most salient points from it. Maybe you don't need to convince them that via your presentation that these issues exist, because they're already bought in, and it's just documenting and prioritizing is what you're achieving with the mind map. I hope that answers your question, Hannah.
Great. And you have a question from Vivi that says, great presentation and thank you for sharing. Have you explored other methods besides mind maps for rapid observation entry and analysis? And if yes, could you discuss the mind map method's strengths and weaknesses compared to others? Yes.
I'm aware we've only got 2 minutes, so I'll be really brief. I guess the advantage it has over doing it on a Word document is it is somewhat structured. So by the time you've taken all your notes, when you go back, you'll see all of your notes about the tutorial are in the same place. All of the notes about the jetpack are kind of in the same place. And also mind maps allow you to rapidly move notes between sections. So if you are creating new categories or moving categories, you can drag them around simply. The other format that people will use is Excel. I guess the advantage that mind maps have over Excel is that you have to have a good idea when you start what the category is going to be when you make an Excel format, whereas on mind maps you can create new ones on the fly. The downside of mind maps, I guess, is it's a specialist skill. It might take a bit of practice to be familiar with it, and you're usually more familiar with Word or Excel than you would be with mind map. I'm going to read through quickly, just because we have 1 minute, through the last few questions, if that's right, Triskel. I think 2 researchers on the same mind map, not with a lot of the tools, although we looked at Miro, that apparently does it, although Miro isn't so great. It's not a dedicated mind map tool, so some of the other things we talked about might not be possible on Miro, M-I-R-O. Do you take notes yourself while moderating, or designated note taker? I'd recommend a designated note taker. You can't pay enough attention to the participant and type at the same time. And having a designated note taker means you don't have to spend another day watching the videos back. So it can help speed up, but obviously it's a luxury to have a second person. Yes to mind maps for the post-interview findings. It's assuming you're a reasonably quick typer, you can keep up with what people are saying by just typing and using the shortcuts to create new nodes as possible. Also, you know, in a semi-structured interview, what the questions are going to be in advance. You can prepare the areas for each question and then put them in the right section immediately because you know what the questions are going to be. Sorry, I know I'm going over in a second. User research mentorship. The games research and user experience special interest group, which maybe someone can put on the chat, has a mentorship scheme where it puts people in industry in touch with people interested in a student or people interested in joining games user research. There's a lot about it on their website, so I'll put up the chat on the website in a second where you can learn more about that. And yes, Suzanne, I haven't tried putting having game teams add their own observations live to a mind map. We've done it with post-it notes before, and we've had a section of the observation room where people can add their observations and do things around. But it'd be a really interesting experiment to get them to try and actually put stuff into the mind map itself. I imagine the barrier will be they might not be familiar with the tool, and they might find that harder to do than writing their notes in something they're more familiar with, like Word, or even putting it on a post-it note and then someone includes it later. Thank you for the questions. They were fantastic. I'm sorry I had to rush through them.
All right, thank you so much for your time and for a great presentation. And people can feel free to follow up. I believe his contact information was posted earlier if people want to send other questions.
Fantastic. Thank you for the opportunity, and I hope everyone has a good rest of their day.